with some heavy-duty bungees, and then get some tarp clips and some hooks on the side so that it actually sits on there nice and tight. And as Patrick seems to be concerned, buy an attractive tarp. Don't get a blue,
no bungees.
Don't get a blue one. Yeah, no
don't
bungees.
use bungees.
Yeah, don't use bungees.
You put your eye out. Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Digital Brand Manager Rob Watzak.
Hi.
Deputy Editor Matt Milham.
Hello.
And Producer Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
You know, so Pat Steed, who's Andy Engel's wife, is the most overachieving baker I have ever met and had the pleasure to sample her delicious confections. Well, she brought over cinnamon buns to the family this morning, and they got me all wound up. So it's going to be a fun show for everybody.
Nice.
You got to try her cheddar bacon scones. Those are good.
Oh, my God.
Oh, yeah.
So we had
fun.
Andy Engel as our, building skills editor for a long time. And the beauty of that was when you'd go to shoot a video at Andy's house, in his shop, you'd get scones from Pat, and they are amazing. Did you guys ever have scones, or can I hold that over you that you haven't?
I don't think I got anything. I'm trying to remember. No, I don't know if I have.
Oh, the cheddar bacon scones are killer.
She is really a good baker.
Yeah.
So what have you guys been doing? Rob, you go first. You seem to have a little more landscaping going on at the house. Like digging holes seems to be a new hobby.
I was actually, before the show, I was thinking of saying, would you believe that I didn't do anything this week? And you'd probably say no, right? I don't think that's ever been the case.
Well, I see the evidence on Facebook, so.
We bought a tree, a little tiny maple tree, and we wanted to put it in this one corner. You know, my driveway used to go a little bit further, and there's this sort of patch of blacktop in our garden now, and I've always hated it. So I was like, I got to get rid of some of that. So I dug about a yard of gravel and old blacktop out of a big hole and filled it with what I thought was soil, but the local agway loaded a whole truckload of composted manure into the back of my
Oh, that's a happy accident, huh?
Well, it's fine because I actually was able to mix some of the sand from the hole in with it to kind of make something resembling soil. But the problem is my dog actually ate a whole bunch of it. And it's like scary. She was sick for like a day, and we were really worried about her. But so now I had to mulch it as soon as possible to keep the dog from eating this stuff.
That's not going to stop her.
No. But yeah, so I took some rocks from that pile I've been working off of and built a nice border around it and planted this little maple tree. It's kind of like our little Japanese corner of the garden now. It's got some other conifers kind of mixed in there, and it's nice.
That's cool.
But that's what I do on a Saturday night is, work till like 11 o'clock at night with a headlamp on, digging a 2-foot deep hole in my yard and then filling it back in.
So what does one do with, unused asphalt on a city lot, Rob? Do you toss it on the neighbor's property, or what do you do with that?
Yeah, it's on the edge of the neighbor's property. No, actually, I got that steep hillside in my backyard, and I kind of carved a little path down it. So I'm basically using the stuff as sort of a base for a path that will eventually get stone dust, and on top of that, it will get probably bluestone at some point. But the thing is, I mean, this blacktop is 60 years old. I mean, it basically looks like gravel.
It's gravel now, yeah.
There's almost no asphalt left in it. So,
Matt, what have you been doing?
Just gardening, mounding up potatoes, getting all of the rest of the plants in the ground or seeds in the ground. That was most of a day probably getting all that done.
All vegetables or perennials or other plants too?
Yeah, a mixture of some flowers, mostly like companion planting type stuff, to keep bugs down. And then, lots of tomatoes, squash. I don't know. We already had carrots, beets, potatoes, leeks, garlic and cabbage, I think, in the ground. So yeah, this is just the rest of it. Oh, and peas we had in already. But yeah, so moving we still had like 3 yards of dirt. I still probably have a yard of dirt left.
Compost or
compost?
dirt?
Yeah, compost in my driveway that I need to move. But yeah, those potatoes, they shot up probably 10 inches since Sunday at least. So need to basically remound those, and those should be good for the season, I guess. Other than that, I broke my toe playing disc golf, but that's
I haven't talked to you about
things.
this, and I don't know if Jeff or Rob have, but how the heck does one break one's toe playing frisbee golf?
I wish I knew. No, it was just it was funny because I had walked up this tee box, and it's in the woods. It's not a completely finished tee area, so I looked at it and I was like, somebody's going to get hurt on this, because the front of this tee box has like either a 4x6 or a 4x4 that's embedded in the ground. And I was like, somebody's going to, break their toe or something on their follow through. And then I did just that, like probably a minute later. So yeah, it was great. And then I played in a tournament a couple days later, and it was fine.
How'd you do?
I tied for 4th.
Wow.
Out of 31. So
So
not
what's your
terrible.
handicap on the disc golf course?
Both of my rounds were 4 over, which was not fantastic for me, but not bad.
That's pretty good, man.
Yeah.
If you were a golfer, I'd say that was amazing.
Yeah.
4
well,
over
I mean,
par?
this is also my home course. It's like, 4 miles from me. So I have a little advantage there that I play it, at least once a week, probably.
God, be careful though, buddy. You could lose a leg.
Oh, yeah.
So this is like a real, like, permanent course, and there's a bunch of them around?
Yeah, there are courses all around here. I know there's a bunch in Connecticut, but yeah, I can't remember. There was a stat from there's a Professional Disc Golf Association, and I think they said there were something like an average of 2 new courses going in a day in 2020. Like, the sport is just kind of blown up.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Do you think that's COVID related, Matt?
I think it probably is, because
Yeah.
it's it's a low barrier to entry. It's inexpensive. It's in parks. It's generally free.
Your course is free, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Jeff, what have you been doing? You been out in the yard too?
Yeah, a lot of yard, doing lots of fiddly stuff around the house, and a new shower heads, new under cabinet lights, exciting things like that, but nothing.
Ooh. Tell me about your under cabinet lighting. Did you go all in with drivers and LEDs and this kind of stuff, or did you do something more affordable?
No, they're LEDs. They're but not expensive ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing how, like, that whole industry, that whole technology has changed. Because I remember we did a piece, I don't know, 10 years ago or less than 10 years ago on under cabinet lighting, and there were all these expensive, like, modules, and LEDs were so expensive back then, and everything was really clunky and big, and now you could just basically go to Walmart and buy like a 20-foot roll of LED tape with a color changing remote control for like $20 and run it under your whole kitchen.
Don't remind me. Liam bought like 100 feet of this stuff from Amazon with the like color changing LEDs. It just it gives me a seizure when I go in there. I'm like, how can you live in here?
Does he have the one that like responds to music, so you can have it like a disco?
Yeah, it
in there?
has like hundreds of different functions that, oh my gosh, it's crazy. And like you said, it was $30 for 100 feet of this stuff. Anywho, so I've been keeping the home fires burning. Carol's been very busy in the garden and with perennials. She bought literally dozens of plants that she's been putting in the ground. And I did a couple silly things. I covered my cordwood with synthetic underlayment and then cap nailed it to the sides of it. It comes down like onto the sides probably 12 or 18 inches. And it's kind of a durability test of Typar's version of synthetic underlayment. We'll see if it holds up until the cordwood is ready to be burned. But it seemed like a more tailored way to do this than a tarp or ideally I'd have a woodshed, but I'm not going to do that right now. So we'll see how this works. It's kind of an exciting project for me.
So basically you built like a tar paper shack for your woodshed.
But it's synthetic underlayment, Rob. It's way better. Right? It's not even a tar paper shack. It's like the top of it's wrapped with the underlayment. So
Is it in shade or is it exposed to the sun?
it's in shade.
Okay. Well, that'll help it a little
photos.
bit, I think.
I put a photo in the assets folder like a minute before the show we started meeting here. So you'll have to look at that later and tell me what you think. I'm very proud of it. It's very upholstered looking, shall we say?
Yeah, it looks like bonnets or something, or like a really poorly upholstered couch.
So I was in the home center on Sunday, and just for giggles, I went over to the plywood rack to see what stuff was selling for. And that's the other photo I put in the assets folder is, I think it was like close to $90 for a 3/4-inch pine CDX plywood and Danbury.
Yeah.
Speaking of home centers, I was in one last night, and they must be, I guess they're probably gearing up for Memorial Day sales. But the plywood aisle was packed with pallets of plywood. Like they had 3 times as much. They had 3 times as much plywood as I've ever seen in that store. And then the drywall aisle was stacked almost to the ceiling. Like there were like 8 stacks of drywall on top of each other. And I've never.
What do you think's up with that?
I have no idea. I mean, like you could barely walk in the store. It was bizarre.
You just wonder if because the price is so high, they're just like, well, let's sell as much as we possibly can, right?
Or maybe all of a sudden there's sort of like they got in all the shipments that were on back order all at once. I don't know, but maybe it's just also because of the holiday weekend. They figured lots of people are going to be starting projects since although people are starting to travel again, and maybe people are going to start spending their money on vacations again. Who knows?
Dan Colbert posted on Facebook, a note or a letter from his supply house, and like the percentage increases across the board, like insulation, drywall, all the things that you use for building a house were going up at least a few percentage points, sometimes 15, like everything.
Yeah. I had to go to both of the big box stores in Danbury last week to pick up some stuff, and I've never seen either of those stores so busy. And I mean, I go there all the time to pick up stuff for, random shoots and stuff like that. And it was almost impossible to get parking. I just could not believe how many people are out.
And this was in the middle of a weekday?
Yeah,
Matt?
this was on I think a Wednesday. So, yeah.
See what happens.
Yep.
So Brian wrote in, thanks so much for answering my question in episode 338. Here's a few follow-up pics to show what it ended up doing. You guys might not remember, but Brian called in asking how to insulate his master bedroom closet. After he tore down the plaster or the wallboard, he discovered that his walls had no sheathing on the exterior, and the claps were applied right to the studs. And so he sent us photos showing his very tidy installation of first asphalt felt paper, and then insulating with mineral wool, and then re-drywalling. So looks good to me, Brian.
That is a meticulous asphalt paper installation.
It's beautiful, right? That's how you have to do it if you want it to be an air barrier.
Yeah, nice creased corners and everything. Yeah.
What were you going to say, Matt?
No, it looks fantastic.
Yeah, it does. Good job, Brian. You're a model for the rest of us. This is from Ian. Hey, podcast crew, thanks for the amazing content you push out with style, humor, and accuracy every week.
Accuracy?
Ian, I don't know. I was with you to that point. In FHB 252, you were responding to someone's thoughts about using a tankless domestic hot water heater for a radiant floor. Okay, so first he butters us up, and then he's going to... Patrick, I'm afraid you went off on a misleading tangent talking about the temperature and about up north where he lives, the incoming water will be very cold, etc. And you ended up on a big watt rating needed for the heater to do this little floor. The incoming water won't be very cold unless he's starting from a total frozen start. The difference between the supply and return on the radiant floor will seldom be more than 20 degrees Fahrenheit and often less. The steady state watts needed could easily be calculated, but it's likely well under 10 kilowatts for this floor. Sure, make it bigger if you want to come up faster from a cold start, but that's not what radiant is good at. A key bit of missing advice, if you really want to do this, you need to put glycol and water. You have to put a glycol water mix in there, like 50-50, so it can't freeze and burst the pipes. Now you have to find out if the domestic hot water heater can handle the glycol, and many are not warranted for the duty cycles of space heating either. Fun to talk about, but I agree with some of the advice, just not the right way to heat this place. Yeah, I did get off on a tangent. I was talking about the temperature rise when you're using a instantaneous water heater for domestic hot water, right? You're actually getting it out of the ground in many cases. If you have a well, or the city water can be quite cold in the wintertime too if you live up north. So yes, I did totally miss the boat on that.
Yeah, you were thinking straight up hot water, which is a continuous feed from a source as opposed to a closed loop.
Yeah, so he was asking about an electric version of these things. And when you're talking about significant temperature rise, they take a ton of juice, which was the point I was making, but I was still missing the boat. Yeah. Thanks, Ian.
Well, and if you're dealing with a well, just another point, that the temperature of the water coming out of the ground is going to be pretty consistent year round. Like the winter temperature the winter temperature isn't going to be that much different. I mean, you might have a shallow, either a shallow well or your pipes are shallow, too shallow.
Well, I guess it's more, because it gets really cold in the summertime too, which would, reinforce what you're saying, Matt. So yeah, I guess it's just that the water is cold if you totally exhaust the storage tank that's coming out of the ground, right?
Yeah.
I bet mine is 50 degrees, maybe?
Yeah, that's probably about right. And that's probably pretty consistent. I mean, caves work the same way.
Right. You get your water from a cave?
Well, no, probably not. A tiny little man-made cave that's big enough for a well casing. Yeah.
That's kind of what it is, right? You're drilling a cave into the ground, right?
Yeah.
This comes from Gavin. Hello, pod people. In recent episodes, there have been many questions about why the cost of lumber has increased. I came across this really interesting, in its own right, construction blog/newsletter, Construction Physics. In it, he has an entry concerning the topic of lumber prices and building material costs. I found it interesting that the things seemingly unrelated to lumber, like the Texas deep freeze early in the year, had a major impact on composite wood products because the polymer/glue production stopped. Also, that raw wood supply is not the issue. Anyway, thought you'd enjoy the blog in general, as it seems to be really well thought out. Been listening since episode 1 and enjoy every episode. Thank you, Gavin. So I went to the Construction Physics newsletter, and I'll put a link on our podcast page. And I did read the lumber piece, and honestly, we've heard so much about this, there wasn't a lot new in there for me. But I did find this really amazingly interesting article on the effort in the late 60s and into the mid 70s about the government's efforts to improve the efficiency of residential home building. And it talks about all these companies coming together and submitting their proposals to the government, I think it was HUD specifically, on their manufacturing methods to boost home production. And it was very interesting, and I loved that. And thanks for that alone, Gavin. But you guys should take a look at that. I'll put that on the podcast page too.
Yeah, I actually went and took a look at a couple other articles. So the guy who writes it is this guy named Brian Potter, and he's a mechanical engineer, I believe. He does an engineering firm that does like mechanical and heating and electrical and plumbing systems.
But it's really well done, right?
It's so well done, so well written, and super smart. Like there was one on construction efficiency and production systems. Basically, the whole sort of idea that everyone says that manufacturing is so much more efficient than the construction industry, and how misleading some of the data that they cite to sort of explain that. And, what it comes down to a lot of times is the fact that we are basically figuring things out as we go on the job site, as opposed to everything being figured out and standardized like you would have in a factory. And I mean, when you've got multiple trades doing work that have to sort of dovetail in the most efficient way possible, it's never going to be 100% efficient. So
I've heard it said too by, the builders that we deal with, it's every project is a prototype, because, you're not working for a tract home builder that's building the same home over and over again. Every one is a one-off. So there's obviously complexity involved in that.
Yeah.
Did you look at any of this, Matt?
I did. There was an interesting link in that piece on the lumber prices, talking about the problems down in Texas, and how the the plants weren't able to shut down properly. They didn't get enough warning about the power outage, and so stuff had congealed in basically the pipes. And so, the startup, turning the power back on wasn't enough. Like they had to basically clean these, production lines out to be able to bring them back online. And that was affecting all these other industries too. It's not just construction. Like there was the article, the one article that he linked to was they make products for pools up in New York, and they get a lot of their stuff from Texas, and they were running out of, I guess, like polyethylene and these other things they need to make their pool products. And so, it affected a whole lot of stuff. I imagine, probably everything from, bottles for dish detergent and, soda and anything that uses plastic.
Resin, right?
Yeah.
Well, and the thing too is that all of our industries now have gone to these like only buy it when you need it kind of
just
models.
In time.
Yeah, just in time models because because it's much more efficient. They don't have to pay for warehouses full of stuff.
And move it twice. You just
want
it to get right to the line without having to store it and move it from somewhere.
And also, I guess a lot of the mills have consolidated over the years, and like any corporate consolidation, they keep trying to run at the most efficient capacity possible, so that when there's a hiccup or a huge change in demand, it just throws a big wrench in the works.
Can you imagine what it's like to clean out vats of like urethane adhesive and pipes and stuff?
Well, my dad drove a cement truck in college, and he was talking about how like only once did he have some cement hardening up in the truck, and he had to go in there with a jackhammer and break it up to get it out of the cement truck. So but
won't stop for lunch again.
But yeah, cleaning up congealed resins in some extruding machine or whatever. Who knows?
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, so this comes from Carson from Oregon. I said that right? Do you hear that? Hello, FHB crew. A few months ago, I asked about CNC cut plywood for cabinets. I have gone through the process and can now offer some comments. Overall, I would highly recommend it if you are good at SketchUp or another CAD program. I decided to go with a panel cutter over CNC as it was faster and cheaper at only $75 an hour for machine time, and I didn't trust my ability to accurately convey dado cuts in CAD. That seemed like it would be more complicated. A few dados I need will either be pre-cut for drawer slides, as I can buy sheets just for that, or I will need to make a few dados myself with my router. Building kitchen cabinets, a large 4x10 island, and a vanity worth of plywood was only 2 hours of machine time or $150. Compared to cutting it yourself, this was a major time saver. Even if you were an all-star panel cutter, the savings in time, waste, and dealing with large material for $100 or $200 seems well worth it. Compared to RTA cabinets, if you already have a cabinet meticulously designed in CAD, I use SketchUp, he says, with all lengths accurate, including dados, then going this route seems like a no-brainer. Well, I didn't go with CNC cut dados, which would be another option. If you're okay with screwed butt joints for cabinets, then the difference between panel cut and RTA cabinetry is pretty minimal. You can even buy drawer slide sheets that already have dados in them, 1/2 inch up from the bottom of the drawers. So all you have to do is slide your machine cut drawer bottom in and out and glue and nail. Cost savings over an RTA company I compared to, while a bit apples to oranges, as they gave different designs, was in the ballpark of $8,000. SketchUp has a free extension called Open Cut List. All you need to do is mark all of your 3/4 inch pre-finished plywood as, say, red, and Open Cut List will then produce a list of the cuts needed in that material, which you can then send to your sheet supplier for cutting. It can even produce diagrams of the optimal cuts on the 4x8 panels if you want. The downside compared to RTA cabinets or a first full-service cabinet company is a little bit more assembly time, but possibly a lot more design time if you don't have extensive experience with SketchUp or another design program. This part of the process took me longer than I expected, though my SketchUp skills were very rusty. Since I wanted highly customized cabinets anyway, I was going to be largely stuck with this design process either way. This could likely be farmed out to someone else for a fee. Well, that was super helpful. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'll tell you, when I worked at that shop that did those like retail installations in New York City, they had initially had a single small, really slow CNC router that we would use for only specialty things, but eventually they invested in this big giant one, and it would cut out, like, you could cut 30 individual pieces out of a sheet of plywood in like less than 10 minutes.
But how long would it take to tell the machine to do that work, Rob? Because
Well, that's the thing, is that there's some variables here you got to consider. Like, if you got to be comfortable with designing. You got to be comfortable with designing in a computer software in order for this to be worth it for you. But then again, maybe.
Did you find it difficult to learn that, Rob?
It's certainly time consuming to learn it, because you also, if you're working with the machinery itself, you have to transfer the files from whatever your design software is over to a program that works with your CNC machine.
Tell me if I'm wrong, but I've heard them described as the design programs and then toolpath programs.
Yeah. And then, of course, I mean, if you're doing the stuff yourself, like with your own CNC machine, you have to learn all the little subtleties of like running the tools at the right speed and depth. And it depending on the sheet goods that you're using, sometimes they leave little tabs that need to be cleaned up, depending on how it's fastened to the bed of the router. So there's a lot of variables, but I mean, it took us a while to get used to the person who was designing the stuff to make it the right way for the machine to do it efficiently and without making a mess. But once we did, it was like, oh, you screwed up that piece. Just yell to the guy in the CNC machine, and he'll just spit out another piece in like minutes. So that's the cool thing about it, is that like if you have access to the machinery, like even if it's farmed out to somebody in your town, you could just basically say, hey, can you rerun that sheet? And it definitely, it wasn't so much about increasing our efficiency on really simple stuff, but when we did more complex things, it really, really upped our efficiency.
I'm surprised how affordable this is. I mean, to have someone cut all your pieces for, in his case, was $150, that seems like a steal.
Yeah, that does seem, but I guess, as these machines become more prevalent and more affordable, the prices come down. It's similar to like how, 10 years ago, you could have bought a 3D printer for thousands of dollars. Now you can buy one on Amazon for like $300,
We should maybe make cabinets like using 3D printers in reality.
I'm sure there's somebody's probably trying to do that somewhere, just like those concrete 3D printed houses.
Yeah.
Yeah, people keep saying that's going to be the next big thing. I'm a little skeptical about that. Any thoughts, Jeff or Matt, about the CNC cut plywood?
No, not really. I mean, I've seen, we had one in the shop when I went to school, and I never used it. It was mostly the cabinet making, like the kids who were in the cabinet making course that used it. But it was cool. I mean, there were people making all kinds of interesting, not just cabinetry, but like gadgets and stuff with it. They were cutting out like gears and making things that actually, worked. One kid was trying to make some sort of I think perpetual motion machine that I don't think was really going to work. Some sort of a power generator that, was supposed to just keep going. But obviously that was never going to work. But
it needs more magnets.
Yeah. It was cool to dream.
Here's our first question. We got to get to it. Hi, FHB Podcast. I work in energy efficiency and always love the talks about air sealing and insulation. But I thought I'd pose a question for you all that you might be a little bit out of your that you might find a little bit out of your typical range. Everything is out of our typical range. Anyway, 3 years ago, we bought a house, and as a washed up and aging skateboarder, my dream was to build a mini ramp in the backyard. A mini ramp is essentially a half pipe, but much smaller and without any vertical walls. I tried to be budget conscious. Read, I'm very cheap. When building this ramp, which is entirely exposed to the harsh New England weather conditions, I surfaced the ramp with 2 layers of 3/8-inch thick plywood and painted it with basement floor paint. I figured that would be good enough, and when the inevitable water and impact damage sets in, I can cut out and replace as needed. Well, surprise, surprise, 3 years later, and the deterioration is beyond what I'm able to keep up with. There are products out there that are purpose-made for ramps like mine, Gator Skin and Skate Light, but at $130 a sheet, and my already mentioned cheapness, I'm not about to spend upwards of $800 to surface the ramp. Instead, I'm thinking of purchasing sheets of masonite It has a great texture for skating and is usually used outdoors in dry climates for around $12 a sheet, and treating it with someone to make it more waterproof. Would you have any recommendations for this plan, or am I setting down another path of folly? Attached are some photos of the ramp in its current condition. Did you guys see his ramp?
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks a little rough.
Yeah. So I did a little research on this, and because I guess I should have assumed that masonite is a common thing in dry climates or indoor skateboard ramps because it's got that nice smooth texture. So on some of the skater forums, they were saying, and this was going to be my guess too, is that they use a spar varnish on it to give it some longevity. Because the thing is, masonite is basically high density fiberboard, right?
It's paper.
It's but so the thing is, it's very porous. And if you remember years ago, Patrick, I probably told you about this. I was planning on testing out some masonite or hardboard floor tiles in a room, and I bought a bunch of sheets of it, cut it into 2-foot squares, and I was experimenting with finishing systems for it. And I stained it with some Minwax stain, and then I was polyurethaning it, and it would soak up. It took like 8 coats before it would get glossy on the surface. But the thing was, then the thing was basically impregnated with that polyurethane. So it was like a much harder surface. And I imagine a spar varnish would probably do the same thing. I would recommend basically, if I were doing multiple layers of it, maybe that you would roll on some like water resistant glue before you put the second layer on, so that you don't have these gaps inside for water. But there is an even easier solution that I think a lot of the skaters use is they use tarps. And I'm sure some of them are just draping tarps over it. But what I would probably do is like make some sort of system where you could have like a pole on each side and a rope running across the top, and like a boat, you know, how a boat usually has a tarp that goes over the boom on it to keep the water out of the boat. And just, you know, that would probably give you a lot of help too. I mean, the good thing, masonite is actually more water resistant than a lot of other sheet goods because it's got a lot of resin in the surface. But I don't know. I think spar varnish, outdoor glue, and a tarp. That's my.
Who wants to
answer.
go next? This is. I don't know. I love this question. Who's next?
I don't know. I mean, it still sounds like a bad idea to me. I don't know.
But at
What
only
sounds like a bad idea? Like skateboarding when you're middle-aged, or the ramp?
the idea of. I mean, yeah. I mean, it sounds like masonite is, or hardboard at least, is, you know, like a good solution for indoor applications. But I mean, most of this stuff is not rated for outdoor. I don't know if you're going to be able to, you know, get enough finish on that it's going to last a long time. And
what about with Rob's suggestion of keeping the weather off of it?
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, if you're essentially creating indoor conditions and you're able to, you know, keep it protected that way, sure. But, you know, I don't know. If he just wants to leave it out. I mean, having a tarp just sitting out in your backyard, you know, a tarp covered thing may not be the most attractive thing. I don't know if you can get one printed with
Have you seen the ramp, Matt?
Yeah.
That's probably not his biggest concern.
Yeah, I mean, it may not be. I mean, it's a little bit of a, I wouldn't say it's an eyesore necessarily. It looks like it would be fun.
It looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah, but
He's got a tall fence. Nobody has to look at it.
He's going to have to reskin this thing anyway, you think, or no?
Yeah.
I mean, he's going to have to take that old. Yeah, he's going to have to take that old plywood off. I mean, how many layers of, I guess, 1/4 inch probably hardboard would you need to actually?
I think he should go to the skate. I think he should go to the skater forums for that, because it seems like it's a pretty common.
I think it's depends on how much you weigh.
Yeah,
I mean, how big an air you're getting,
or
right?
the spans of your framing, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I went on some of those skater forums too, and they were not using this entire, like they were using it as the skin, but they were still putting plywood underneath for sort of like the main support. So I don't think it's gonna on its own be able to handle the weight and, you know, like dropping in and, you know, taking a jump and landing back, you know, like say you don't hit the ramp part and you hit the bottom, you're going to go right through it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think when he described this as out of our comfort zone, I think that was a euphemism for like completely beyond our knowledge whatsoever.
Yeah. We're just completely making it up and guessing.
That was really one of my first concerns is like, masonite seems like a very common material for these skateboard ramps, at least in dry or indoor conditions. But yeah, like I didn't take a close enough look to see what kind of spans they put that stuff on. But I guess if you put a couple of layers on it, and I don't know.
I'm going to suggest some other materials, and you'll have to figure out what to do with them. But like MDO is a plywood material that's got a like smooth lamination on the surface of it. Some people call it signboard, but it's meant to be outside. And I don't know if they make it in thin enough thicknesses that you could bend it to this, radius for a skate ramp. The other thing I was thinking of is, West Systems epoxy, which is kind of spar varnish on steroids,
But now you're getting expensive. How much epoxy would it take to coat that thing? It would be hundreds of dollars. He's starting to get back into his plastic ramp material price
Yeah,
range.
that's the thing. When I looked at MDO or MedX also, and the prices for that were pretty far up there by the time you got to the thickness you needed to actually, create a deck that would be able to handle skateboarding on.
Yeah. See, my whole thing, like I would have said no way to the hardboard, to the masonite, except for the fact that it's so cheap, and then spar varnish isn't that expensive. So if he wants to do something cheap that probably will last a little longer than what he did the first time around, I think it's worth a shot.
I'm with you, Rob. I think keeping the weather off of it, when you're not using it, is going to go a long way to making this thing last longer because the coating won't be exposed to UV, water won't be standing on it. So if you could set up some kind of system, as Rob suggests, to tarp it, and that'll add to its attractiveness.
Yeah, and be smart about the tarping system. It's like, basically
make it easy, right?
At the top of each end, make a little pole that just goes into a hole so that you can have something for a rope that goes across it. Maybe the rope is on a cleat or something so that you can get it on there, or with some heavy duty bungees, and then get some tarp clips and some hooks on the side so that it actually sits on there nice and tight. And as Patrick seems to be concerned, buy an attractive tarp. Don't get
No bungees.
Don't get a blue one. Yeah, no
Don't
bungees.
use bungees.
Yeah, don't use bungees.
You put your eye out.
Use tarp clips or something.
Yeah.
Jeff, I'm sure you were a skateboarder. What do you suggest?
I have no experience with masonite outdoors. It just seems like a really
bad idea, doesn't it?
idea.
Yeah. But it has that perfectly smooth surface, which you really need for skating, right? You can't have any imperfections or it's going to make you wreck.
Yeah, I mean, to go to the extent of doing multiple coats of spar varnish, it's like, all right, what about fiberglass then?
Well, that's kind of what Patrick was talking about, using epoxy. Yeah, I guess you could use.
I mean, because
polyester
spar varnish is not cheap.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do think that the spar varnish is it. The fact that I have experience with it, like the polyurethane and varnish soaking into this stuff, that maybe that will add a little bit of an extra protection than it seems like. But I don't know.
It's an experiment.
Yes.
Anything that is not like tried and true. I mean, I would just stick with, shell out the $800 if you really want to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, $800 for your hobby is not that much money, I don't think.
Agreed,
Personally.
especially if it's going to last for 10 years, right?
Yeah, as
versus
opposed to
2 or 3.
Right, doing it every 2 years at $200 a pop versus $800 for something that lasts 10 years.
Yeah, the older I get, the more I think that way. Where I'm like, do I want to do this multiple times, or do I want to just like
enjoy it,
put the money in and build it right the first time?
I agree. Spend some money.
Or go to a local skate park.
Yeah, go to the town park, right? This comes from Wade in Sioux Falls. Hello, FH Beers. Writing in for some more help on my 30 by 50 2-story shop build. Couple of questions. 1, I'm looking to do radiant heat under the slab. Is there a good up-to-date detail that you recommend? As you can see per the attached drawings, the second floor will be finished with the hopes of using it as an Airbnb. Question is, how do I accurately separate the two spaces from noise and smells while at the same time allowing some of the heat from the lower space to permeate upstairs. Is this even possible, or should I just go with my original plan to use mini splits upstairs? I plan on using a hybrid wall insulation system with 1.5 inches of spray foam and batt insulation to fill the rest. The walls are 2x6. I'm sure I'll have many more questions, but feel you are up to the task. Appreciate all you folks do. And then he put a hashtag CCA. I think he meant KCA, Keep Craft Alive, but I'm a big fan of CCA too, whatever. Wade, so no, you can't warm the upstairs if the downstairs is going to be a shop and the upstairs is going to be an Airbnb. You have to completely separate them. So I think 2 heating systems is a must. Do you guys disagree with me? I mean,
No,
how
especially
else
since
are you going to do it?
You got them for 2 different uses that are probably going to both be intermittent. So it doesn't really make sense to have a single heating system for the 2 separate spaces.
Well, and especially a radiant system, if that's going in the slab, like, you know, I mean, a radiant system warms objects, not the air really. You know, it's sort of like, you know, if you're outside on a sunny day and you're like getting baked in the sun, it feels really hot. And then you go into the shade of a tree and you feel really cool. The air temperature is exactly the same. The only thing that's different is you're getting shaded from the radiation coming from the sun. A radiant floor, you know, I mean, if there's a ceiling or a floor above that, which is the case here, like that ceiling and floor is going to essentially shade the upstairs from that radiant slab. So like, you know, by the time that got hot enough to warm the upstairs, you know, warming that ceiling and floor, it would be unbearably hot in the shop space, I would think.
Yeah, I would agree. And whatever you do, Wade, make sure you insulate under the slab. That is such a common mistake people make, and people who are very smart make this mistake. But you have to do that if you're going to heat the space at all.
Yeah,
especially if you're going to do radiant.
Yeah, because it's going to the coolest thing. So you know it's going to cool it's going to warm the ground
soil
before it warms you
yeah.
up. Yeah.
I think the reason why a lot of people make that mistake is because they hear the old adage, heat rises, but no, hot air rises. But heat goes to wherever the coolest thing is, especially when you're talking about conduction. You know, it doesn't matter what direction it goes in.
I'm going to get on my soapbox too, Wade, with regard to, I don't think radiant tubing, hot water heat is the way to go in a intermittently used shop space. Unless you want to condition it all the time, then it's probably fine. But if you're not going to condition it fully all the time, then a forced air system is going to allow you to be comfortable when you're out there and save some money on heating when you're not. So what do you guys think? Is that bad advice? I mean, everyone says, oh, it's so nice to work on a heated floor. But honestly, you know, how often are you out in your shop? And I think that's something people fail to think about.
We've talked about this before. It's like you need a little more information to make this, make this distinction. It's like if someone was working out there as a full-time job and it was well insulated, then a radiant floor might make sense. But like as you say, if it's an intermittent shop for doing projects around the house or hobby or whatever, yeah, radiant probably is not your first choice. Jumping off to the other question he said about insulating for sound and smell. I mean, basically, it seems like one of the simplest ways that people do that is with those sound dampening adhesives and 2 layers of drywall, right, between the space above, and especially if you're going to have a shop down below, from a safety standpoint, it's not a bad idea to have that thick layer of drywall there.
You totally need a drywall layer.
Yeah, but if you're really getting serious about soundproofing, then you get into some of those isolation clips and some other things. But I'm kind of wondering,
mass-loaded vinyl.
Yeah, yeah, layers of that thick, heavy, mass vinyl. But I'm also wondering, it's like, if you've got an Airbnb, are you going to be really running power tools underneath there when you've got guests upstairs?
So our friend Andy Engel has this very scenario. His shop is under their Airbnb, and the people who were just there most recently were there for 7 weeks.
Wow.
You know, are you going to be able to use your shop? He's a carpenter every day. So do you think he wants to go in his shop and work on his off hours and cut wood? I don't think he does.
That's right. It's mostly just a place to throw all his junk, isn't it?
It's a junk storage. Anyway, so, he
Bike
did
storage.
a drywall ceiling, and he made sure to be, air seal around his light fixtures. You got to stop air to stop the majority of sound. And then when you start talking about low frequency sounds that'll travel through materials, it gets way more complicated. And then, as Rob suggests, you need isolation clips or resilient channel or all these things to decouple the two, the materials so they don't transmit sound. So Andy's solution was to put mineral wool in the ceiling, air seal the heck out of the drywall layer, and then have the entrance to the Airbnb as on the exterior of the building, so you don't have like some kind of door or whatever connecting the spaces that sound could more easily get through. But it's going to be optimistic to think you can fully separate the noise so you can do run woodworking machinery while you have guests upstairs, I would say, unless you're getting into very expensive assemblies. You guys are looking at me like I have two heads.
No, we just figured there was nothing else to say. You
Okay. So this question comes from a conversation Rob and I were having earlier in the week with our coworker Chris, who does the alchemy of posting the podcast up on our various servers platforms. So he says, Chris says, my DeWalt drill bit the dust and I wanted to replace it with something better. I didn't like the size. It was too big and heavy. It was old and it was never very powerful. And I want one with a light. Suggestions? I'm liking this one. And then Rob says, that's cool for driving and removing screws and bolts. If you also want to drill holes, you'll probably want a separate drill that is not an impact driver. If you only want one tool, get a drill. Though impact drivers are awesome for driving screws, so just get both. Can we please stop saying, Rob, that you can't drill holes with an impact driver?
I didn't say you can't drill holes with an impact driver, but if I were drilling holes in metal, okay, maybe in sheet metal or wood, in a pinch, I would use my impact driver. But if I wanted precise holes and I didn't want
I'm going to hurt myself rolling my eyes.
Okay, well, I did a little research afterwards, and I do realize that there are impact-rated drill bits nowadays that are made for drill bits. So maybe it's been a while since I bought a set of drill bits. But if I were drilling a piece of 1/4-inch steel, there's no way I would be using an impact driver for that.
Matt, can you talk to this guy? I don't know what the heck's wrong with him.
Yeah, I've used it. I mean, I've used an impact driver for drilling holes in masonry. I've used it for everything because, I mean, you can get the bits that are, chucked for the impact for pretty much any material, it seems like these days, and they work fine for me. I mean, I kind of get what your concern may be. I don't know. But, it sort of is a little bit disconcerting when it starts impacting because, a lot of times it will just spin sort of like a regular drill. And then once it starts impacting, then, maybe you could end up with some, I don't know, like out of like imperfect holes or something like that. But I don't know. I haven't had that issue.
I just love the smug look on Patrick's face right now.
I can't believe we're having this conversation. Is really the long and short of it.
You did notice that at the end of that text that we were sending back and forth with
you were
Chris,
just trying to get my goat.
That
is
I
what
said,
it came down to.
Maybe it's just that I enjoy arguing with Patrick. No, I'll tell you what. When impact drivers first came out, I hated them because they were so noisy. And then once they started getting better and lighter, I was like, you can't live without one of these things. But have you noticed that if you go to any big box store nowadays, they usually sell them in pairs, a drill and an impact driver. And it's almost cheaper to just buy one of those 2-piece kits.
Rob, I'm gonna concede here a little bit. Yes, if you are drilling thick steel with big holes, it is not the right tool. But how the heck often are you drilling thick steel in
that's like
residential in residential building, right?
See, then I was the wrong person to ask because I'm always drilling holes in heavy steel.
So you can get, spade bits now that have the hex shank chuck, and I see electricians using those for their instead of the right angle drill for small jobs anymore, in residential work, and I use it for that. It works fine. Yeah. I will say I don't like the Bosch spade bits, and they are great in a normal drill because they drill super fast, but they have this screw tip, and it's meant to pull the bit into the stock, which is fine most of the time. But if you're using it in an impact driver, it makes it start impacting, as Matt suggests. You know, when you're drilling with an impact driver, ordinarily, if you're not really leaning on it, it doesn't impact at all unless you're drilling a huge hole. So it works just fine. And I love the fact that it has the hex chuck because it makes it so fast and secure to change bits. You know, if you have an assortment of these things, you know, you can change in a couple seconds to drill a pilot hole and then run the fastener in if you need to. It's great.
I mean, we're talking about how convenient those little slip lock hex connectors are on the tips of most drills and a lot of drivers now. Do you remember having to chuck a drill into an old corded drill with a hand chuck, like
and a key?
And a key. Oh man, I am thankful for the advancements in tools over the past 15, 20 years. It really makes working so much more pleasant.
I totally agree, Rob. I was thinking about that the other day. And Chris, don't listen to Rob. Get an impact driver. It'll change your life, and it'll drill all the holes you need to drill. If you need to drill a big hole in steel, call Rob. Oh, we got another tool question, right, Rob? Do you want to launch into this one? This comes from our Fine Homebuilding forum.
Yeah, so someone who on the Fine Homebuilding forum calls himself or herself Nomorecoffee. Putting up some half-inch lightweight drywall in my finished attic, I used some OSI F38 drywall adhesive and screws. I do my best to set the screws evenly and just below the surface with a slight dimple. Doing this nights and weekends, I've got a lot to do, so it's taking weeks. When I go back to panels I've done a while ago, it seems like the screws sit a little higher and I can drive them back in maybe a quarter turn pretty easily. Can't tell if the screws backed out on their own or if the adhesive shrunk down and pulled the drywall tighter, leaving the screws where they were. Mostly see this on the ceilings, but that's what's been up longer. Anyone seen this before? And there were a whole bunch of guys in there giving advice on, are you using the right tool? Some people said go get one of those dimple drivers, which is pretty much all I've ever used because I
brought some visual aids to our discussion, Rob, because I wanted to help you out. So this is my impact driver with a dimpler on there.
Yeah, and that's
basically a 3-inch bit holder.
And I mean, I'm sure most of our audience is familiar with those, which is basically a Phillips bit with this little collar around it that prevents you from driving the screw right through the drywall and makes a nice little depression around the screw. And then, of course, some people said, if you really want to do a nice job and not struggle with it, just invest in a real screwdriver devoted for driving drywall screws. And the thing about those that are really cool is that they have a little, it's not really a clutch. It's basically, there's a spring-loaded gear.
It's not spring-loaded.
Right?
Well, the bit is.
Yeah, so it doesn't actually engage the bit to spin it until you put pressure on it, which allows you to put a screw on it while it's spinning, which means you can leave the thing engaged the entire time instead of having to hold your finger on the trigger and just jam those things in there over and over again.
And professional drywall hangers will lock this thing on and just... It's amazing how quickly they do it.
Yeah. Now, one thing I will add, though, that Andy Engel he's in the forum regularly, and he said maybe you aren't pushing the drywall tight to the framing when you're screwing. Sometimes you actually have to put some pressure on it. It's not just going to suck it in like a piece of plywood would with a regular screw. And but what's also probably complicating it is the fact that he's got this bead of mushy adhesive on there too. So it's like he's got to push against that adhesive and hold the panel in place overhead while he's using a regular screwdriver to carefully drive screws. So
I have a third theory.
Yeah.
If this is taking a long time to get done, it would seem to me that the framing lumber could be shrinking as the broom is being finished, right? Which would make those screws potentially loosen up. So I think it just might be the matter of this is taking a long time, the lumber's drying out and making those screws loosen up. But that's speculation.
I have a fourth theory.
Okay.
That he's getting the first few screws in there and they're not driven all the way because he hasn't had the panel up tight. And then he's, as he's going across the panel, he's getting that panel tighter and tighter, and it's sucking in a little bit more. And so those first few screws that he drove are like popped out, and he probably hasn't gone back and looked to see whether or not they're as flush as the rest of the screws.
That's quite possible, man.
Yeah.
I think that's a good suggestion.
I remember one of the drywall tapers that I used to work with when I was a carpenter. He meticulously went and checked screws before he went and taped, because he did not want to be called back for any nail pops.
Yeah.
And that's a pain in the ass, but it's probably not a bad idea for that guy to for Nomorecoffee to go back and to give a little shove on the panels. But like you said, it could be a combination of all of these things: not using the right tool, not putting enough pressure on the panels, and then of course if you've got some new lumber and it's shrinking, then you could have pops. But I don't know, is this an existing space? I didn't catch that. If it was, it might be old lumber. So Patrick's is probably the least likely scenario.
I'm just going to let that go. So I just wanted to have a little conversation about this might be the oldest power tool I own. My father actually bought this probably in the early 90s, I want to say. Maybe in the late 80s.
What are you holding in your hand there, Patrick?
It's a drywall screw gun. This is a Makita. Let me look at the model number here. 6801 DB. And it doesn't have a lot of miles on it. I don't know. Like, my dad maybe hung like 5 sheets of drywall in his entire life. I have no idea why he bought this, but I ended up with it. And I've used it quite a bit. But honestly, because I'm not a drywall hanger and hanging dozens of sheets a day, I mostly use an impact driver with the dimpler. And with the 3-inch bit holder, I can reach an 8-foot ceiling with this while standing on my tippy toes, so you can actually get a couple screws in there and then, work more at a leisurely pace. But what do you guys use? You still using nails, Matt?
Yeah. No. I
Come on,
pretty much use what you've got there. I just use the dimpler bit, and it works fine. I've hung out with Myron Ferguson on a few jobs, and he has switched over. He's always used these collated guns, or at least has for a long time.
Senko was the one I remember he used for years.
Yeah, he used that, and then he had switched to Festool, and now he's switched to this. I think it's a DeWalt collated attachment. I don't know. I think it just attaches to a drill driver, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But anyway, he loves it. So that's probably, if I were getting into it full time, which I probably will never do because I don't love drywall, I would probably get something like that, because it is great having that, sort of auto feed. I mean, you only get, I don't know how many screws, 30, 50 screws in one of those strips, and then you got to change it out. But it's a lot better than getting all those tiny little metal shards in my fingers, which is what happens every time I use, boxed drywall screws.
Yeah, so the drywall screws inevitably have like bad machining, so they leave these like razor sharp little slivers on there, and when you're reaching around to grab a screw, inevitably they stick in your fingers, and it really hurts.
Yep.
I got pretty good when I was doing this work a lot to like being able to dig them out with a utility knife, because that's what you got on your tool belt, right? And
yep. They're usually easy to see because they're black.
Yeah, it's awful. Jeff, what do you think about the drywall fastening scenario?
Yeah, I'm with you. I mostly use just an impact driver.
What do you think's going on with these loose screws?
I think the likely scenario is a combination of the adhesive, filling space as it gets drawn in.
I've seen insulation make it difficult to get drywall tight to framing too, and can result in, loose fasteners and pops later. So if you're trying to like compress a bunch of batt insulation, it could be contributing to the difficulty you have getting those screws tight.
Yeah, that's why some people actually, it seems more common in New England, but some people do the horizontal furring, the perpendicular furring strips. One, just to create a chase for work sometimes, but also just to suck in that insulation and not have those batts pressing against the back of the drywall to make it much easier to install.
I'd never seen the strapping thing, outside of This Old House episodes when I was a kid. Anywhere else in the country, it's kind of a peculiar thing to New England. But it makes some sense to me. Of course, with the price of wood, what do you think a stick of 1x3 strapping costs right now.
The funny thing is I bought some strapping a while ago and it didn't seem to have gone up. In fact, there was even some cheap, like, they have those like, they call them like construction boards. They're just like really rough sawn pine planks that you would use maybe for form work or whatever. And those, for some reason, were still relatively cheap.
Because they're awful.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I don't know.
Did you guys happen to watch this YouTube video I put on the script?
Yes, it was hilarious.
It was hilarious. So it's, do you remember the person who wrote this? Rob, can you look that up for us, please?
The guy who did the video, his name is Stuart Hicks, and he's a professor, an architecture professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago.
All Good Architecture Leaks, a 5-point guide is his video, and it is hilarious. It is one of the funniest things I've seen in a long time.
We'll put a link in the everyone should go and watch this. I don't want to totally spoil the sense of humor, but his whole point of view is that basically leaks are something that architects and clients are striving for in buildings, and he uses a lot of very famous examples. And my favorite line was, so the takeaway is that leaks look different to everyone. They can become sources of power for both architects and clients. When architects are excusing the unintended consequences of their genius, or when clients are looking for free work.
That was so good.
But it's like a comedy sketch. You have to watch it. But it's
delivered with great deadpan earnestness, right? It's very clever.
Yeah. It's fun. You gotta see it.
What are we forgetting, Rob?
What are we forgetting? Oh, go check our website. We're publishing new project guides every month or so. The wiring one is up now, and we're just starting to work on tiling. So in another month, we'll have the tiling website, which is full of lots of great things on waterproofing showers and choosing mortars and adhesives. And
because we never talk about that stuff on the podcast.
Yeah. But I'm excited about it. We're just we're chipping away at every important topic on the website, and hopefully in about a year we'll have pretty much every topic covered, so that you won't have to struggle to find the hundreds of articles on that topic that we've published over the past 40 years.
And I think it's important to mention, Rob, that they're not just articles, but they're Q&A questions and other smaller pieces of content that often are very focused to the matter at hand, right?
Well, that's the thing, is that we've got everything from simple illustrated tips that Chuck Miller's been illustrating for decades that all come from our readers. We've got the Q&A, expert Q&As, which are people's questions just like on the podcast here, except they actually get answered by real experts.
People who know what they're doing answer them.
real professionals. And then, of course, we're over the years we made more and more how-to videos, and there's tiling actually has a ton of great videos on water, especially on waterproofing, so you don't have leaky bathrooms.
Very good.
Check it out. It's just go to the homepage, and there's a big, huge block in the middle of the homepage that takes you to all of our project guides.
I think that's awesome because, it's looking at a bunch of resources on a topic is often answers some of the nuances, or, discusses some of the nuances that, one piece will not, right?
For sure.
Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Jeff, Matt, and Rob for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com, and please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. And check out the Teespring merchandise store, Teespring at Fine Homebuilding, and you can get podcast t-shirts, Keep Craft Alive t-shirts, and other merch from the Taunton Company, and please do that. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe. Happy building. Keep craft alive. Happy building.
Bye-bye.